Next on the news.
We've added cameras, armed our staff with pepper spray, and stopped running our mobile clinic because of threats of violence.
The director of a pregnancy center explains to Senate lawmakers how her pro-life work is worth the risk of any potential attacks. And
we know that this has a tremendous impact in many ways, many levels on kids and teens and their development.
How violence, trauma, and poverty is having an effect on teens who turn to gun violence. We'll speak with a clinical psychologist from Catholic Social Services in Philadelphia. And a fourth vaccine approved for COVID-19, why it may be a more ethical choice for Catholics. Plus, how an X-ray helped to find a Van Gogh masterpiece that's a century old. I'm Emily Drewby. Currents News starts right now. They've been targeted nationwide after the Supreme Court overturned Roe. Pro-life pregnancy centers vandalized and some even set on fire. Now we're hearing from the head of one of those centers who testified before Senate lawmakers about how the risk of attacks is worth it all in the pro-life fight.
Pregnancy care centers from coast to coast are being targeted for violent assaults of vandalism and hateful attacks online and in the media.
Heidi Matzke is the executive director of Alternatives Pregnancy Center in California. She's speaking to members of the U.S. Senate. She claims misinformation stemming from the Roe v. Wade decision is leading to attacks on pregnancy centers like hers. Heidi also sharing this image of a man with a machete at her center's door right before they opened for the day. A security guard was able to derail that attack, but it still rattled the facility.
We have been forced to hire 24-hour on-site security. We've had to reinforce doors and bulletproof our walls. We've had to paint our building with anti-graffiti coating. We've added cameras, armed our staff with pepper spray, and stopped running our mobile clinic because of threats of violence.
Meanwhile, in the wake of the overturning of Roe v. Wade, pro-abortion advocates are now looking to the House.
Report the motion.
That's where a bill allowing pregnant women to cross state lines to obtain an abortion is expected to be up for a vote. The bill is an attempt to preempt any states who might try to prevent abortion tourism now that Roe v. Wade has been overturned. The House is expected to pass this bill, but it's likely Republicans will block it if it makes it to the Senate. And that vote in the House could come down as soon as Friday. U.S. bishops have been keeping track of attacks on Catholic churches and other pro-life organizations since 2020. And according to their records, there have been at least 15 instances of vandalism since Roe v. Wade was overturned on June 24th. 7 of those attacks saw church property vandalized with pro-abortion and anti-religious messages, and 2 are currently being investigated as suspected arson. New York's bishops have been making a promise to help expectant mothers choose life. Ahead of the Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe v. Wade, they sent out a message to moms in need saying, "We will not abandon you," promising that any woman, regardless of beliefs or situation, can go to any Catholic church and get the services and support she needs to carry her baby to term. To find churches and pro-life centers near you, just go to nyscatholic.org/help for moms. Meanwhile, in West Virginia, 3 people now face arson charges for the destruction of a historic Catholic church. 18-year-old Braxton Miller, 19-year-old James Elmore, and a juvenile boy have been arrested for allegedly setting St. Coleman Catholic Church on fire last month. Authorities say the 3 lit some plastic flowers on fire in the chapel while drinking, then put a pew over the flames and poured vodka on top. The small chapel was known as the Little Catholic Church on Irish Mountain and dates back to the late 1800s. If you'd like to help rebuild the historic landmark, Catholics in the Mountain State have established a fund called For the Restoration of the Spirit of St. Coleman. Donations can be made payable to St. Coleman/St. Patrick and mailed to St. Patrick Catholic Church, 2nd Avenue, Hinton, West Virginia, zip code 25951. New York Governor Kathy Hochul announced today she is allocating millions of dollars in funds for gun violence prevention.
We have a gun violence epidemic here in the state of New York. Full stop. That is a statement of fact. It's a public health crisis. I don't need to tell you that it also takes you down mentally.
The $13.6 million will be used to create more prevention programs and strengthen crime analysis centers across the state. Some of the money will be added to an emergency fund to help gun violence victims respond to trauma. The move comes after Governor Hochul officially signed a new gun safety bill into law earlier this month. Legislation bans New Yorkers from carrying the weapons into businesses unless the owners put up a sign explicitly saying guns are welcomed. The bill also lays out a strict licensing process for concealed carry permits, and it requires background checks for ammunition sales. And coming up in this newscast, we speak with someone who helps young people deal with the trauma of events like mass shootings. Dr. Jim Black, a licensed clinical psychologist and director of Youth Services Division of Catholic Social Services in Philadelphia, is joining us. That's coming up on Currents News. And on top of all this, new crime statistics are out for New York City, and they're not good. Preliminary NYPD statistics show that crime skyrocketed in June, up by more than 30% last month compared to the same time last year. The NYPD Commissioner Keechant Sewell blamed repeat offenders released back out into the streets because of revised bail reform laws. Let's take a closer look at the numbers. Grand larceny spiked 41% in June, robbery rose more than 36%, and burglary was up almost 34%. Again, all that is according to new NYPD statistics. COVID cases are on the rise in New York City, and the Department of Health is urging residents to wear masks in all public indoor settings. It comes as the latest Omicron variant, BA.5, has become the dominant strain in the U.S. In New York, the infection rate has been rising in all 5 boroughs since April, surging to nearly 20% in the past 2 weeks alone. However, it may be worse. Some experts say this latest data severely undercounts the true number of infections. But a new vaccine is on the horizon. On Wednesday, the FDA gave approval of Novavax's protein-based shot for emergency use, and it's expected to be recommended by the CDC later this month. Amy Kiley reports on what makes this vaccine different from the rest.
The virus continues to evolve very quickly. We have to constantly be updating our response.
Well, here's a notable update. You could soon have access to a 4th kind of COVID-19 vaccine. A version from Novavax now has FDA emergency use authorization. The CDC is expected to recommend it as soon as this month.
It's great that we have additional options, especially for something that's slightly different.
It's unlike the other 3 vaccines because it uses protein fragments to teach the body how to fight COVID. If you're vaccinated against hepatitis B or whooping cough, you probably already had a vaccine that works like this. The latest variants weren't around when Novavax developed its vaccine, but the company says it appears to have a broad immune system response to the BA.5 Omicron offshoot. That's good news because it's the dominant variant right now and the most contagious one yet.
There's also fatigue, sore throat, headache. Anecdotally, we're seeing some of this more with BA.5.
Experts say getting vaccinated is your best protection against severe illness. But if you haven't gotten boosted this year, you might want to reconsider.
Immunity against infection wanes pretty quickly, and it goes way, way down.
Meanwhile, drug companies are trying to update existing vaccines for whatever comes next.
The vaccine that we are going to have in the fall will be a substantial upgrade, but we'll see how closely it matches what is circulating at that moment.
I'm Amy Kiley reporting.
The Catholic Medical Association says Novavax may be the more ethical choice for Catholics. Dr. Robert Tabali previously spoke with Currents News and had this to say about the new shot.
This one is very exciting because it doesn't have any of the Catholic ethical dilemmas of association with aborted fetal cells.
Ahead of the FDA's authorization, the U.S. government already secured 3.2 million doses of the Novavax shot. The vaccine will now be made available for free to states, jurisdictions, federal pharmacy partners, and federally qualified health centers. In other news, Brooklyn's Bishop Robert Brennan joined the faithful in Williamsburg for the Feast of Our Lady of Mount Carmel, calling the festivities a great way of professing our love for God.
We celebrate our faith and we hear the message of the Lord in the gospel to love God with everything we have and to love our neighbor as ourselves. God bless you.
Bishop Brennan also participated in the Giglio lift, but even though he didn't roll up his sleeve and carry the 4-ton, 72-foot-tall tower, he did get to ride on top during the much-beloved night lift. There's a lot more news headed your way. Gun violence and mass shootings gripping the nation. We'll speak with a clinical psychologist about the root causes of it all. And it's an organization that helps so many nationwide struggling with inflation, how the community is trying to pull through for the Salvation Army. Plus, the jaw-dropping price to rent an apartment in Manhattan, why the housing market isn't helping. With mass shootings and the explosion of gun violence nationwide, there's a push for tougher gun control laws. One clinical psychologist says some of the main causes are teens in the U.S. enduring chronic trauma, violence, and poverty. Dr. Jim Black, director of the Youth Services Division of Catholic Social Services in Philadelphia, joins us now. Welcome, Jim.
Hi, Emily. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Jim, thank you for being here. Now, you argue that chronic trauma has a profound impact on kids and teens. What is chronic trauma, and do you see this with your work in Philadelphia?
Well, we absolutely do, Emily, and it is a terrible problem. And it's something that not just me, but everyone in the field recognizes as a terrible problem. A lot of people are familiar with post-traumatic stress disorder, but what we're talking about here is something that's really qualitatively different. We're talking about kids being exposed over long periods of time to tremendous violence, trauma, loss, and we know that this has a tremendous impact in many ways, many levels on kids and teens and their development.
Oh, the stories you must know and have seen firsthand must be heartbreaking. So most of these kids have access to a gun or could easily get one, but why would they want one?
Well, I think if you ask them, they would tell you one word: it's protection. And so when there's so many guns out there and so many of the kids and others have guns, when you don't have one, it really puts you in a vulnerable position. And so I think the kids, if you ask them, why do you have it? They would say protection. And then we know that, you know, if you have a gun, it gives you a certain sense of power. It makes you a somebody. Without a gun, you can be seen as a nobody and having no power. And you can find yourself in a very vulnerable situation.
Now we have both chronic trauma and gun availability. How do both of these play into this gun violence we've been seeing around the nation?
Well, the chronic trauma, as I mentioned, has such an effect on brain development. And that brain development includes things like kids' abilities to control their impulses, control their emotions. We know that there are neuroimaging studies that show that it inhibits the development of the cortex. And the cortex is that part of the brain which is responsible for judgment and decision making. So when you have kids whose brains have not properly developed, and they're really operating using the emotional part of the brain, and you combine that with the availability of guns, it's a terrible combination, and of course it leads to the results that we're seeing on the streets here in Philadelphia and elsewhere.
So then, Jim, do you think the status of a kid's family unit meeting access to like a classic parent setup also contribute to the problem and the trauma that these kids are facing?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, one thing we know is that kids need adult supervision. All right, they need people who have these developed brains and have the good decision-making skills and problem-solving skills. And so without that adult supervision, and we know we like to see kids in traditional families, nuclear families, where they get the benefit of two parents that are teaching them, disciplining them, supervising them. Without that, you know, we had 4 kids late last night on the streets of Philadelphia who were themselves victims of gun violence. And so it really begs the question, where's the adult supervision? Why are they out late? Who's watching them?
And Jim, what can the church and our political leaders do to build up feelings of safety for the youth, especially when you continue to hear stories like the one you did last night?
Well, I think, one of the things we know is that kids need consistency. They need programming. The city itself just announced the other day an anti-violence, anti-gun program. And they know that there are several things they can do. They can have intervention programs, enrichment opportunities for the kids, prevention programs, workforce development. I'm very proud of the fact that Catholic Social Services here in Philadelphia provides programming for kids on a continuum of care, from outpatient to day treatment to residential care. Kids need consistency. They need to know that adults care about them, they love them, and they need adults to look to for guidance and protection.
Well, thank you so much for everything you and your team are doing for our youth. And again, Dr. Jim Black, Director of the Youth Services Division of Catholic Social Services in Philadelphia, thank you so much for being with us today.
My pleasure. Thank you, Emily.
If you have a car, then we have some good news for you. Gas prices have come down in recent weeks. In the city, New Yorkers are paying on average $4.80 for a gallon of gas. That's down 35 cents compared to a month ago when New Yorkers were paying $5.15 per gallon. But sadly, it's still incredibly high compared to a year ago when a gallon only cost $3.28. The sharp rise in inflation is impacting an organization that helps so many nationwide. The Salvation Army has been hit hard by the rising cost of providing its different services. Kristen Rogers has the story from Cedar Rapids, Iowa.
Do you want everything?
The Salvation Army in Cedar Rapids serves breakfast and lunch to anyone who needs it, Monday through Friday. While a good portion of the food is donated, they foot the cost for the rest.
We have a certain dollar amount that we can spend each month, and the cost of some things has gone up more than just a little.
At a price of $3.80 a plate, the Salvation Army serves around 100 meals a day. That's up from $3 a plate a year and a half ago. And meals don't stop completely on weekends. Instead, they're taken out.
We do also do a homeless outreach on Saturdays where a volunteer crew goes out and we do about 80 sacked meals, breakfast and lunch meals.
Serving those in need despite the higher cost of food and painful prices at the pump. Back in the kitchen, workers are gradually lessening the use of to-go boxes. It comes as they're seeing more people coming in for meals and requesting a second one to take home.
Do you want a sack, sweetie? Yes.
But like most things, those styrofoam boxes have been getting more expensive.
We almost always have seconds available towards the end of the meal time, and you're more than welcome to have a second meal. But we're trying to move away from using anything to go just to cut the costs.
While it's gotten more pricey to provide their services, the Salvation Army says community support is getting them through. And especially the increase in donations seen over the holidays as they exceeded their Red Kettle goal.
If it wasn't for the generosity of individuals, if our giving was at it maybe had been traditionally, it'd be really difficult for us to keep up.
That was Kristen Rogers reporting. The Cedar Rapids branch of the Salvation Army says it's also trying to recover from an incident last month where $1,200 worth of gas was siphoned from all 9 of its trucks. In the Diocese of Brooklyn, the tablet is here to help if inflation woes have you searching for an affordable meal. This week's paper compiled a list of food pantries all throughout the diocese. Just last year, these pantries helped to distribute more than 1 million meals to more than 100,000 people. And if you would like to give back, you can also use this list to find a pantry near you to donate to. To see the full list, just go to your local church and pick up a copy of the tablet. And for future editions, you can get them sent straight to you. Just subscribe at thetablet.org. Something good that could come out of rising inflation, Social Security recipients could see a 10.5% increase in their checks next year. That's according to a new estimate by the advocacy group, the Senior Citizens League. The estimate is based on the June reading for an inflation measure that the Social Security Administration uses to calculate the annual cost of living adjustment. The increase could add $175 to your average monthly retiree benefit, which stands at over $1,600. But an exact amount on the increase won't be determined until the fall. That boost in Social Security will be of little help paying the rent in Manhattan, where the average for June was just over $5,000. That's according to Douglas Elliman and Miller Samuel Real Estate Appraisers and Consultants. The brokerage firm says that's about a 25% hike from the year before. Analysts say one reason for the spike is home buyers who paused their search and decided to rent instead. Still to come on Currents News, it was almost lost forever. Now it's a big discovery in the Midwest for beer fans. Next, how it was uncovered. Plus, a work of art by Van Gogh unseen for more than a century, found in a surprising place. Do you have a story idea or want to share a tip? Email us at newstips@desalesmedia.org or call our 24-hour number 718-517-3122. We'll be right back. This one is for history and beer buffs alike. A buried beer cave thought to have been lost to time has been uncovered, and it's generating a lot of buzz in Iowa. As Andrew Molenbeek reports, the discovery traces back to a brewery with a colorful past.
Craft breweries get a lot of buzz these days, but more than 150 years ago, a beer cave was built right here below my feet in Winterset, and now its history is starting to be discovered. This stone building was once the first brewery in Madison County. In the mid-1800s, the way to keep beer cool was going underground in a beer cave.
The hole was already there.
While some locals had heard about it, the buried beer room had been lost for decades.
I believe it's about 12 foot by maybe 20 foot. Beautiful arch ceiling.
Chuck Johnson says a crew recently found the cave while boring in some power lines, though they didn't know what it was.
When we poked our head in the arched ceiling, there isn't a fly in it. It's just like it was brand new.
There was even talk they'd found part of the Underground Railroad, but the Madison County Historical Society had a pretty good idea what it was from the start. Jared McDonald shows us a county atlas from 1875.
This is Union Township, which is where the beer cave is located. And we're looking right there at the brewery by M. Schroeder.
Morris Schroeder's brewery had been quite divisive in a town with a very active temperance movement. This newspaper article from 1873 writes, "There is much complaint about the disturbances happening at the brewery." It even notes a stabbing. And on the Sabbath, mind you.
He was basically ran out because of the brewery, his beer, because they didn't want it in the community anymore.
For now, the beer cave is buried, but light imaging radar will eventually scan it. Madison County will then decide how best to preserve it.
But anytime you find something from the 1860s, it's really exciting.
That was Andrew Molenbeek reporting. The beer cave is currently filled with water, and local officials are waiting until fall when the water recedes to take a closer look. In another exciting discovery, art historians in the UK have stumbled upon a secret self-portrait that only X-rays could reveal. The discovery was found on the back of Van Gogh's The Head of a Peasant Woman, after an X-ray revealed the undeniable face of Van Gogh hidden behind the 137-year-old painting's canvas. Experts believe the self-portrait has been hidden for more than 100 years, covered by layers of glue and cardboard when it was framed in the early 20th century. Experts say Van Gogh was known to reuse canvases by flipping them over. And that is Currents News. I'm Emily Drewby. Thank you for joining us, because we are putting your faith in the news. Hope to see you again next time.